It's coming.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you. It's daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers.
My name is James Hershey. Right back.
All these shadows in my mind. From my reflections I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a
That ought to
ghost
do
of
it.
you and me. Of you and me. Don't let 'em take you away. Don't let 'em bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let 'em bring you down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
I am doing pretty good. How is everybody tonight?
On tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about a kind of cool thing. It's a legend. It's a mystery. It's got a witch. It's got murder. It's got burning at the stake. It's going to be pretty fun. And this is the legend of Mary Stockum. Now, according to the legend, there was this woman who was named Mary Stockham, and she had 9 kids. And supposedly she was a witch. And one of her daughters was mentally disabled. Her second husband murdered her mentally disabled daughter. And all kinds of hell broke loose after this. Now you might think, well, obviously, right? You killed her kid and her mentally disabled kid at that. So there's even more protection over a child with special needs like that. You feel more protective of that kid. Murdering that child, of course, all hell's going to break loose. But the weird thing is, that isn't what upset Mary Stockham. She didn't get real pissed off that her husband killed her kid. What she got mad about was that when the townspeople found out about the murder of the child, that when they found out that her husband murdered that special needs kid, they went and they grabbed her husband and they hung him for that crime. That is what made her angry. And she vowed, obviously, she was going to get revenge on the townspeople. Well, after this, her remaining children started dying one by one from a mysterious fever. Nobody could quite figure out what was going on. They were getting a fever, they were getting sick, and they were dropping dead. After the 5th child died, the townspeople kind of figured out what was going on. And according to the legend, they discovered that she was actually poisoning her own children. So they went and they scooped her up. They ended up charging her with witchcraft and burning her at the stake. Her remains were buried in this cemetery. But then after she was dead, after they had already burned her at the stake and buried her body, or what was left of her body, the charred remains, after that, another child died. So they dug her back up, because they thought, well, she must be still killing them, right? So they dug her back up, they cut off her head, and they reburied the head at an unknown location that was outside of the cemetery. They reburied the rest of the body back in the original grave. I guess the thought there was you separate the head from the body and it takes away the power. That's one thing they used to do with vampires is back in the Middle Ages is they would cut their heads off when they buried them. See, a lot of people think that the way you kill a vampire is a stake through the heart. Now, some people will say that's Hollywood BS, right? That you never stake a vampire. That's not the way it works. But that is actually based on reality. Okay, this is going to be a little bit off of the subject matter, but it's going to be interesting. So just hang with me. Where that whole idea of a stake through the heart of a vampire comes from. It comes from the Middle Ages and a little bit before. Back when there were a lot of witch trials, back when people were worried about vampires coming back from the dead and feeding on the townspeople. What they used to do when someone would die, and then things started happening after they died, okay? People started getting sick, sometimes even from like crop failures and stuff like that. When weird stuff started going on, they would equate that to the person that had just died. That person must be a witch or they must be a vampire, especially if people were getting sick and dying. Then they would say, well, that's a vampire. They're feeding on them, drinking their blood, and that's why they're weak and that's why they're getting ill. So what they would do is they would exhume the body. They would dig it up, and they would look for signs that this thing is still alive. Now, some of the signs that they would look for would be the hair continuing to grow after death. Also, they would look for the fingernails continuing to grow after death. The majority of the time when they dug up a body, they found those signs. Now, the reason they found those signs is not because every person they dug up was a vampire. The reason they found those signs is because the fingernails and the hair continue to grow after death for a little bit of time. I don't remember exactly how long. It's I believe several weeks after death they continue to grow. So they found those signs and they said, oh my God, look, this person's not dead. Their hair is still growing. Their fingernails are still growing. Another thing that happens when you die is rigor mortis sets in. Now, people think of rigor mortis, you become like stiff like a board. But also what rigor mortis does is it causes the muscles to contract, and it will actually draw the lips up, which makes the canine teeth appear more pronounced than they normally are. It looks like you have fangs. That is where the whole idea of the vampire fangs come from. Also, you'll have liquids, I guess that's the nicest way to say it, liquids oozing from your orifices. Now, this will come from the anus, it will come from the ears, sometimes the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Sometimes you have a lot of liquid, sometimes you have a little bit of liquid. The liquids can be clear, and they can also be dark like blood. So a lot of times when they would exhume these corpses, it would appear to them that there was blood coming out of the mouth. So they thought, hey, this person's feeding on blood. It's drinking the blood of our people, that's why they're dying. So they decided they're going to do something about it, they're going to stop it. So the way you kill a vampire is by cutting its head off. The reason they would put the stake in the heart was not really to put the stake in the heart, it was just to drive a heavy wooden or metal stake through the chest cavity. The reason they did that was to pin the body into the coffin. Essentially, they were taking a giant spike, like a nail, and nailing the corpse to the coffin so that it could not get back up out of the grave and hurt anybody else. They also figured if they cut the head off, that's really going to slow it down quite a bit. So that is why they did that back in the Middle Ages. And that is where the whole idea of staking a vampire comes from. Putting a stake through its heart to kill it. It doesn't kill it. All you're doing is keeping it in the grave so that it can't get back out. So sometimes when they would exhume witches, they would do the same kind of thing. Back to what I was originally talking about before I went off on that tangent. Most likely the reason they cut her head off and buried it someplace else was to really slow her down and stop her from hurting anybody else after death, from coming back and hurting anybody. And apparently it worked because the remaining 2 children recovered from their illness and they survived. So the last 2 didn't die, they got better after they cut the head off and buried it somewhere else. So today, the cemetery, which is in Kashcotton, Ohio, where the body was initially buried, that cemetery is believed to be haunted by the ghost of Mary Stockum. They say that many people have seen her ghostly figure roaming through the graves, and supposedly she is searching for her dead children, and she's also searching for her missing head. Now, the interesting thing to me here is, how is she doing this? Let's assume for a second that all of this is true. And you actually do have the ghostly, headless body of this chick roaming around the cemetery, searching for her kids and searching for her head. Now, that might be what she is trying to find, is her kids and her head. That would make sense, but how would you know that? How are you communicating? She has no mouth. Her head is gone. She can't talk to you because she has no head. She can't see what she's looking for. So basically, you just have a headless, ghostly corpse wandering around the cemetery, trying to feel things and find out what they are. To me, that's just a hilarious and interesting visual in my mind. To think of this headless corpse stumbling around, tripping over stuff in the cemetery, trying to find her head and her kids. Supposedly, there have been numerous reports of people hearing weird sounds and screams in this area. And many people have experienced a lot of car trouble when they go there. So their car will be fine. They go to the cemetery, and all of a sudden their car won't start anymore. And there have been numerous reports of the headless corpse of Mary Stockham asking people to follow her into the woods. Now, once again, how is she asking anybody to do anything? She has no face, no head, no mouth. How is she talking? Do you not need a head or a mouth when you're a ghost to talk? I'm not saying it does or doesn't. Okay, let's get that right off the bat. I'm not saying that because it doesn't have a head, it can't talk to you. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that's interesting to me. Does that mean that even if you don't have a head, you're still capable of speech when you're dead? Are you communicating through some form of telepathy, where a physical voice, voice box, mouth, lips, the whole nine is not necessary? You can just think it, and the person hears it in their mind. If you think about it, when we go out and do an investigation, and we are talking on the spirit box or the echo box or even EVPs, there is no physical mouth, there is no physical head, there's no physical voice box that's making the noise. So maybe they won't need a head. So one story goes that two teenage boys were visiting this cemetery, and they heard loud screams off in the distance. A few seconds later, they heard the screaming right beside them, and it kept on getting closer. So one of them jumped in the car and told his friend, "Hey, let's get the hell out of here, man. Let's bail." And they took off and they drove just as fast as they could. They never came back. Another story says that one night there was a young couple that went up and they parked in the graveyard. And the reason they parked in the graveyard is not probably what you're thinking. They were hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghost of Mary Stockham. They were there to actually try to see this ghost. So the man thought that he saw something off in the distance. Being a man, he got out and went to look. Instead of just sitting there in the car and just watching, he got out and walked down there to see what he could see. When he got back to his car, his girlfriend that was still in the car was absolutely hysterical. She was freaking out. Her face was pale. She was gibbering like a mental patient. And once she got kind of under control, once he was able to calm her down, she told him what had happened. She said that the ghost of Mary Stockham had come up to the car window and asked her to follow her into the woods. Now, this is another case here of that happening. Remember, we talked about that earlier. So the girl claims that she was so scared that all she could keep saying was, "What in the name of God do you want?" And she said that the ghostly woman answered her, but that what she said was so horrible that she didn't want to repeat it. Now, I would love to know what that response was, if there was one. So now the question is this true? Is any of this true? Because when we're dealing with old legends, you never know. Some of these things that are legends in these small towns are really just urban legends. It's something somebody completely made up. There's absolutely no basis to it. When you actually do the research and you try to find these things, the person never existed, the place never existed, none of the things ever happened, or at least there's no record of any of it. So a lot of times it's kind of iffy. So does this exist? Is this real or not? Is it completely made up? Well, we do know that Mary Stockham is not make-believe. She actually existed. She's real. 100%, no doubt about it, not a single question at all. There is a grave marker for Anna Mary Stockham in the Stockham Cemetery. Now, the reason it's called the Stockham Cemetery is because it's an old family cemetery. Anna Mary Stockham died in 1863. The Stockham Cemetery is located in Coshocton County, Ohio. Same place the legend says that she's buried and her grave is, where all this stuff happens. Does the cemetery match the legend? The cemetery is not a public cemetery. Okay, let's just say that right off the bat. It's not a place where if you die, you can buy a plot to be buried in. It is an old family cemetery that's located back up into the woods a ways. It is where the legend states that it's supposed to be. I actually have directions right to the grave. So I know exactly where this grave actually is. I know where the cemetery is. I know where the grave is. I know this actually exists. I am not, however, going to give out the directions on the radio. The reason there is not because I'm trying to hide anything. Also, it's not because I don't want anybody to go investigate this stuff. Because like I've said before, be careful, but absolutely do investigations and stuff if you want to. Just be careful and know what you're doing. But the reason I'm not going to give these directions out is because the area itself is extremely, extremely dangerous. Now, it's not in a ghetto where you're going to get shot. I'm not worried about the ghost of Mary Stockham trying to kill you. The reason this is so dangerous is because this area was the site of massive strip mining operations. Okay, this happened back in the mid-1960s, where they just strip mined the hell out of this area. They're looking for coal and stuff like that, and there was huge holes that were blasted and drilled down into the earth. A lot of those holes were never filled back in. So as you walk up to this grave, there's just like massive holes in the ground that you can't even see till you're right up on them. And some of them you can't see the bottom of. You're just going to fall for a long, long time. And who knows when you're going to land. But I guarantee you when you land, you're not going to be too happy. It's going to hurt like hell and you're probably going to die. Because you can't even see the bottom of some of these things. Now, when you're going to do an investigation, most times you're doing this at night. When you're going to try to find a ghost or something, it's almost always at night. So you're traveling through the woods. This is a heavily wooded area. This is not a residential area. This is not a city area where you can just drive to. You have to pull off the main road onto this really, really bad dirt road that's all ruddy and terrible. You have to park your car and you have to walk up this road quite a long ways. Once you get to a certain point on the road, you have to leave the road and walk through the woods. Okay, dotted throughout all this area are giant holes that lead down to who knows what. A long way down. Add to that it is going to be dark because it's at night. And you have all the normal animals and stuff like that you have to worry about in the woods. You can understand why I'm not going to give this location out as far as the actual directions to the place. That information is available. You can find it yourself. Okay, it's not some secret that only I know. It's out there to find. I found it. You can find it too if you want to. But I have to warn you, it is extremely dangerous to try to get to this. This is not something that's easily reached. Okay, this is very hard to find and hard to get to, and it's very, very dangerous. So if you do, please be careful. I suggest you don't. Now, we know that the grave exists. We know that the cemetery exists. We know that Mary Stockham existed. Was she a witch? Was she burned at the stake? Did her husband murder her child? Did she murder the rest of her children? That's what the legend says, except for two. Two lived, the rest died. That's what the legend states. Is that true? To be honest with you, I don't know. I couldn't find any records of how she died. I couldn't find any records of any kind of trial of her husband where he was hung. I couldn't find any records of any trial of her where she was burned at the stake. I couldn't find any records. I know she existed. I've seen her grave. There's records of her existing. There's records of her dying and when she died. We just don't know how. One of her relatives, a descendant of Mary Stockham, has heard this legend also. She claims that she doesn't know much of anything about Mary Stockham either, about how she died or what happened. She's heard the legend like everybody else, but she doesn't know if it's true. So apparently nobody knows whether this is actually true or whether it is completely made up. So that means it's up to you to decide. I will give you some more information to help you with that decision. There have been a lot of stories about things that have happened in that cemetery. I told you a couple tonight. of the couple in the car and the kids that had the thing come up to them and they took off running. There's dozens and dozens of these. Of people that claim that this happened or that happened. The problem is, it's all part of the legend. So when somebody's telling this story, they say, oh, well, there was these kids and this happened to them and there was this and this happened. But we don't actually have the kids' eyewitness report. We don't actually have the couple's eyewitness report. We have the story of what happened to them told by somebody. But we don't have their testimony to say, hey, I'm the couple, this happened to me, this is when it happened, this is what happened. We don't have that. We also have had many paranormal teams actually investigate this cemetery and try to find the ghost of Mary Stockham and communicate with it. So far, there is zero photographic evidence and there's zero audio evidence of Mary Stockham. In fact, none of the teams that have actually went there that are real ghost hunting teams, professional teams, have ever gotten anything from her. Now, you get the normal stuff that you get when you go to a cemetery because it's full of dead people. So you do get some spirit box works done. You get some randoms coming in and talking to you. But they have not had an encounter with Mary Stockham. They have not had her come up and ask any of them to follow her into the woods. They have not contacted her through EVP or Spirit Box. They do not have any photographs of her. Nothing. Zero evidence. When you speak to the locals in the area about this legend, they've all heard it. Every one of them that you talk to says, yeah, we've heard that legend. But when you ask, is it true? Have you ever had experiences there? Have you ever been there? A lot of them have been there. Because it seems like this was a very popular party spot back in the day. See, back when we were coming up, it was a different time than it is now. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have like 300 channels to watch. You had 3 channels to watch. And you didn't have really a remote. You were the remote. You had to walk over and turn the damn thing yourself. So you went out and did things to entertain yourself because you didn't have a world of entertainment at your fingertips. So when you're young, high school age, a little bit older, and you're bored, you drink a lot. So people would go out there and they would drink and they would party and they would hook up with chicks and that kind of thing. That's what this area was. So when you ask the locals about it, oh man, they can tell you some stories. But the stories they tell you are not ghostly tales of a headless corpse wandering the cemetery trying to find her kids. They tell you tales that I can't really repeat on the radio because I will get in trouble. Let's just say the tales are R-rated at best. And they do not include dead people. They do not include ghosts or anything scary. They are the normal tales of teenage love, teenage aggression, and the wildness of that time of your life. So there's really nobody that you can actually talk to that you can prove has been there that has ever seen or heard any of this stuff. It's all anecdotal. It's all, oh, well, I heard that this person said that this person went there, that kind of thing. So is it true? I don't know. What I do know is there's no evidence. We know that she existed. We know that she died. We know that she is buried there. But is the rest of it true? Or is it something that somebody just came up with one day? Maybe somebody was up there partying in the cemetery and they tripped over the gravestone or they saw the gravestone there and they decided to make up a ghost tale about Mary Stockham. Could be. Or all of this could be absolutely true. This is the mid-1800s, so records weren't as good as records are now. It's entirely possible that she could have died by being burnt by the town people, and there would be no record of it. A lot of times during that time period, you had vigilante justice. You had lynch mobs. You had people that would take the law into their own hands, and they would go and grab somebody, and they would either string them up in a tree, or they would burn them, or they would just beat them to death or shoot them. That happened. And there is no record of a lot of it. There's tales of it, just like we have here. But there is no court records that will tell you that this happened. So it's possible. So I think my ruling on this is, as far as, did she exist? 100% yes. Was she a witch? Did her husband kill her kid? Did she poison the rest of her kids? Did the townspeople find out and burn her at the stake? It's possible. There are no records to substantiate it. But a lot of times when you have vigilante justice, there aren't any records to substantiate it. So who knows? I know that there's a lot of records of witch burning, but a lot of that takes place in the 14, 15, 1600s, where you would have actual trials and you would have documentation you could look at. The 1800s, mid 1800s, that's a Wild West, man. That's Civil War time. That's a whole different ball game. So I'm going to say possible on all of that. She definitely exists. Possible that all this other stuff happened. Don't know for sure. Not saying yes, don't know. Now, is her ghost wandering the cemetery, looking for her kids in her head? I'm going to say on that one, not very likely. I do not believe that for a second. The reason I do not believe that, you have no actual eyewitness accounts that you can validate and substantiate. You have zero evidence from all of the teams that have went there. And believe me, for the people that went there, this would have been a big deal to capture something. So if they had even the slightest bit of evidence, it would be everywhere. You would know about it. If they had any bit of evidence that they could even say might be related to her, you would hear about it. But instead, what you have time and time again is teams saying, we got nothing. We got a little bit of stuff from other people in the cemetery, nothing from her, no sign of her, we think it's BS. So I'm going to say, as far as, is her ghost wandering the cemetery? I seriously doubt it. I don't think so at all. I think that part of it is made up. I think that's a good tall tale, a good scary ghost story, but it does not exist. It doesn't actually happen. As far as her killing her children and being murdered by the townspeople for it, possible. Absolutely possible. She had a mentally disabled child. Now, we don't know what that mental disability was. It could be anything from a case of retardation all the way to complete psychosis and mania. We just don't know. So if the child was not suffering from mental retardation, but instead was crazy, and that was the mental disability, then maybe that's something that's hereditary or genetic. Maybe Mary Stockham was a little cuckoo herself. Maybe she had psychotic and homicidal tendencies. Maybe she liked to kill. Maybe she killed her kids. It's possible. When you throw in the kid with the mental disability, it raises it up even a little bit more if that disability was a form of psychosis instead of retardation. Very well could be. Very well couldn't be as well. It's possible. So that's my ruling on it. I want to throw over to Old Boy and get his opinion and what he thinks about the case.
Well, thank you, brother. And Mary Stockham, here's what I think. And I'm going to talk about a couple things after this. This is a really interesting story. And I think she existed. I agree with you on that. Do I think that her kids were real, that she had a mentally ill kid, could have been mentally challenged, could have had autism, could have been anything. It could have been mute. And some people, they were fighting over it all the time. They had a couple other kids, a lot more other kids, and she might have, her husband, them were fighting. Maybe they weren't, around each other too much, and having romantic time at that time. So the guy got tired of it, and maybe back then people thought that was a curse. So then he ended the curse and killed her. I believe that probably did happen. What I think what happened with Mary is that she went crazy and she just said killed her kids after the town killed her husband. But then James, there's no proof of it. So, I mean, that could be a possibility because you know what? They did do that in the 1800s and they didn't make any kind of trial because, like I said, it was citizen justice. They basically killed her. And they swept it under the killed the guy and swept it and her and swept it under the mat, you would say. So maybe she got revenge and that's what happened. He killed her kid and they found out, killed her husband, and she lost it, killed all her kids, and was probably trying to poison these kids. So what happened is she was a witch, because back then that's what everybody thought. When things happen like that it must be a witch. She must be involved with Satan. So that's why they probably killed her and did town justice. Back then, no one knew anything. They probably hid it under the mat. The sheriff turned his, the eyebrow from it and didn't really care. So that's probably what happened. Do I think she might have been a witch? There's a possibility. It doesn't sound like that, though, because, that was people saying that she's walking around. They cut her head off. That could be true. That they left her body because people could have started saying she was a witch because she was killing her kids or she was involved with Satan or something. That I believe. And so that's why they took her body and took her head somewhere else. So she wouldn't come back together and cast spells and get revenge because, that's what people thought back then. And sometimes that does happen. If you guys ever seen the Bell Witch, not to get off subject, but AKA the Blair Witch, that's what happened. The witch died and it came back from revenge. And it made people kill themselves. It made some guy go kill people. These hunters went looking for these kids and they were disemboweled and found on the rock. There's 6 or 7 of them they were armed too. And there's just a lot of things like that with witches. They thought they could come back after you. So and just like vampires, same thing. So they keep them from coming after people. So that makes really a lot of sense there. I agree. If that did happen, that probably did. If I don't believe that, but it could have. I'm not saying it's 100% her body walking around as a corpse with no head. No, I don't believe that. Maybe a ghost, I would believe that, or a spirit or something. I would have believed that, but not that. That sounds stupid. That sounds like it's the hearsay telephone effect. Oh, I heard something exaggerated, made it big. And so they tell stories to scare people too, probably keep them out of the cemetery and keep them away. Like James was telling you not to go looking for this witch. That's probably what they did. And back then, and to keep, it's campfire story. They want to scare people too, exaggerate it. But do I believe the lady existed? I do. I believe that they might have killed her and her husband and, like I said, swept it under the rug. So I do believe that part of it. I just don't believe the whole walking around with no head. It makes no sense. There's some people might believe this really happened. I don't believe it one bit. I believe that's probably exaggerated campfire stories. But back in the 1800s, people did get hanged for other things, like back in a lot of western days, like I'm trying to think, certain outlaws, they got hanged. They had a bounty on them. They would do citizen justice. They would kill you. They would take justice in their own hands. You guys have watched the old western movies, like they'll get the town going and rile them up and try to hang you, and you always see like the sheriff trying to stop them, and and I remember the good and bad and the ugly. They used to do that. What was that about? Remember him and the one guy, Clint Eastwood. They had a little thing going where they would pretend to hang, and they would shoot the rope, and then the guy would get the bounty money, and then hurry up and run off. And in the end, he ended up betraying him, and then they getting each other back for revenge. It's a good movie. You guys ever need to see it, but that's what that is. They had lynch mobs back then, and they would take justice in their own hands because, let's see, there was like one or maybe two sheriffs. That's it, with a town of 500-600 people. So there's nothing really they could do. Waiting for a judge, that doesn't happen sometimes. Sometimes the judge was in another town or city, and he had to come in, and it would take weeks. Back then, you're you're riding through buggy. So on rain, snow, whatever's going on, then you wouldn't get there for weeks. So people got anxious, so they took the law in their own hands, and that's what probably happened. They killed her. They probably found out that he killed his daughter. They killed him. She went crazy, probably poisoned her kids, or did something bad to him, and then poisoned the other two because the other one was fine. Or maybe she was maybe she was a witch, and that's what she did. She cursed her family. But another thing is, we never hear anything else about her cursing, people who did this to her. And James can't find any pictures or any kind of information for her, and he usually can. Trust me, he gets into this stuff. Trust me, he dusts out the books that haven't been read for years, and he looks through them, and he can't find it. So I don't believe that she was like a real witch. I think people more a superstition back then. Probably that's why they like you said, you could see when people die, they look like they're bleeding out of their mouths, liquids coming out. That's why they thought people were vampires. They used to stake them in the heart so they wouldn't get up. So that's probably what happened, because back then people weren't educated like they are now, and still some people saw that. They probably, because they don't really know still, they probably would think the same thing. Oh no, it's a vampire, it's a zombie coming back to eat us all. That you could imagine. You see this dead body, it's been dead for about a couple weeks, and all of a sudden people are dying or something's going on. Back then you had a lot of disease, a lot of phantom, and there wasn't the antibiotics we had back then in the 1800s. So all of a sudden, well, that must be a witch. So they probably cut her head off, took her body, left it buried, took her head somewhere else outside of the graveyard so it couldn't get back connected. So it would never get back with the body, so she could do harm on the town and get revenge. Because that's what they think, witches will come back for revenge. They'll sell themselves to Satan, and that's a Hollywood thing. But back then, I believe people really believed that. And I believe that people really took this stuff serious to the point where I think some people got murdered. Like he was talking about the witch trials, that happened. Some people got murdered for stuff they didn't do. And when they tortured you to the point where you would say you were a witch, because they did some really gruesome torturing back then. Burned your tongue, put you in the Iron Maiden, stuff like that. Really pained. They used to smash your feet with rocks and stuff like that, or beat your feet. They hang you up and beat your feet to you admit you're guilty. Of course, you're in so much pain. There's other things too, but you were in so much pain. You're going to say you're guilty. I don't care how much you could take pain. Eventually, it's going to get to you. So that's what happened, and they were killed or hanged or burnt. So this is probably what happened. They figured out she's killing her kids. She went crazy, or the daughter could have been crazy for all I know, and they just couldn't handle it. The dad lost it one night. Maybe they were fighting or something, and some people do stuff in passion when they're really mad. So he killed his daughter. He couldn't handle that she was mentally challenged or sick or mentally handicapped. And she lost it when they killed her husband because she blamed the kids for it. Maybe that's what I think. So I do believe she existed. I believe her husband did. I believe maybe something happened where she went crazy. She might have been a witch. I don't know, but I believe that, but I don't believe there was a walking corpse with no head. I don't believe that. I think that's all story. High school stuff, like James was saying, they're meeting in the graveyard, telling stories, or got exaggerated, or they just hated. Maybe they hid something. There's a possibility on everything. There's always truth to some of this. Remember that. Out of 100% of the story, there's probably about 20 to 25% of this real. or even maybe 30. But that's my opinion on it. I kind of agree with you, James. I think the same thing. It's kind of a exaggeration, but I think she did exist.
What's really interesting to me is you have several parts of this. One part we know is true, one part is probable. As far as this whole scenario taking place is probable. It probably did happen. There's two ways this could have happened. It could have happened the way the legend said. Or, keep in mind, she died in 1863. That's smack dab in the middle of the Civil War. Okay, the Civil War was from like 1861 till like 1865-ish. There was some fighting that went on after. It didn't have a real concrete stopping point where all battles stopped. You still had some stuff going on. But the main war itself was like 61 to 65. She died in 63. So right there in the middle of it. During this time period, it was rough. It was rough in the South. It was rough in the North. Because we're at war. Okay, in the South, you have crops being burnt. You have people starving to death. In the North, you have all of the resources going to fund the war effort. So it's hard all around. Ohio is like right there in the middle of the two. It's not up north, but it's not down south either. It's kind of over by Virginia where I am. Ohio is like 3 or 4 hours from me. So that's going to be kind of caught up in all this mess. It's going to be kind of rough there. They had 9 kids. That's a lot of mouths to feed. Also, during the 1800s, there was not the same respect shown to people with handicaps. Okay, if your kid was retarded or crazy, they weren't looked at as much of a person like they are now. Now, you're not even allowed to say retarded. You get in trouble, right? You got to say like specially abled or whatever the hell you say. There's like new words you got to say for it. I'm an old guy. I don't know that stuff. But you're not even supposed to say the word anymore. Back then, it wasn't like that. It's a different time. They weren't looked at as normal people. They weren't as good as normal people. That's the way people looked at it back then. So imagine you've got 9 mouths to feed, plus you and your husband. That's 11 mouths. There's not enough food to go around. There's not any money to buy more food. So back in the Middle Ages, what people would do is they would take 1 or 2 of their kids off into the woods and just leave them there and come home. And the kids would die, and then you have less mouths to feed. You sacrifice 1 or 2 to save the rest. That's the way it was done back in the Middle Ages. But this is the 1860s. So you can't just take your kid out in the middle of the woods and leave them there because there's not those vast stretches of woods like there used to be. They're going to most likely run into somebody. And then everybody's going to know that you left your kid out in the woods and you're in trouble. So I guess one thing that could have happened is maybe they're trying to thin the herd a little bit so that all their kids don't starve. And they say, hey, we got to get rid of some of these kids, man. We can't feed all these people. So why don't we kill this one? It's not as good as the other ones. It's kind of defective. So let's take this one out. Now, they can't leave it out in the woods, so maybe the father just kills the kid, thinking, okay, cool, nobody will notice. It'll be all good. The rest of the kids can survive or whatever. Maybe that happens. Not saying for sure, maybe. It would be a plausible explanation if this actually happened to why maybe it happened. So then somebody actually finds out and thinks, hey, that's not too cool. You killed your kid. What are you thinking? Maybe he wasn't even thinking straight. Maybe they were so worried about their kids, the rest of them surviving, that they thought, hell, we'll sacrifice the one and the rest of them will be okay. It's possible. The townspeople find out. You can't just kill your kid. That's even back in the 1860s. You can't just kill your kid. So they kill him. You know, little good old vigilante justice. They take him out. So now he's dead. Maybe Mary kind of loses her mind because she loves this man, and now without him there, remember, 1860s, it's not like today. She can't just go down to Walmart and get a job. Women ain't working unless they're prostitutes or working a bar or something. They're not like they are now. You don't have career women. You don't have women that are capable of taking care of themselves like that. When a woman was left alone with no man, she had a tough go of it because she couldn't just go get a job. It wasn't like now. So maybe she's thinking, man, it was already tough enough that we had to kill one of our kids, and now what the hell am I going to do? Now my husband's dead. I have no way to make money. I have no way to feed these children. Maybe she completely goes off the deep end and loses it. So she begins poisoning some of the kids. Maybe not in a mean way to hurt them, maybe just trying to feed some of them and keep them alive by sacrificing some of the others. The same thing they might have done with the first child. Maybe. Maybe the townspeople find out about that too. The kids are getting sick. They suspect something's going on. They find out she's poisoning the kids by using most likely some form of herb or plant that she found in the woods that is poisonous. So they think that's a witch right there, man. She's making some kind of special concoction with plants to kill these people. It would explain a lot. And that's a way that this actually could have happened. That makes sense. That doesn't have her flying around on a broom and all that nonsense. Not saying for sure, I got no proof of it. But it makes sense. So I thought I'd throw that little theory out there as well. One more quick thing before we go. One thing that kind of makes me wonder about the end of this story of the digging up the body after another child dies, maybe that's just because the child had too much poison in him and eventually died anyway. And it had nothing to do with her coming back. But the idea of cutting the head off and burying it in a separate spot, that rings true. And I'll tell you why that rings true, because that was a common practice used by people that today we would call hunters, that people like us that go out and we find these things. You know, we do investigations, we work cases, we do what we do. Now you call them paranormal investigators or cryptozoologists or monster hunters. Basically, they're hunters. They go and they find these things and they kill them. Back then, and even today, that is a practice that is used. When you're dealing with something that you aren't quite sure how to kill, there's no real lore that states how you actually kill this creature. I've said it before on these shows when we do monster shows. I've said it dozens of times probably by now. If all else fails, cut the damn thing's head off, because it can't kill you if it can't see you. Right? You might not be able to kill it, but if you cut the head off, you're definitely going to slow it down. That is a common practice that's used, where you cut the head off and you take it to another location and bury it. That way, it's not, like old boy said earlier, it's not going to come back together and it's not going to hurt anybody anymore. You definitely slow it down quite a bit because it has to locate that head again. That rings true to me. That's the one part of the second part of the legend that makes me wonder if it isn't true. But once again, there is no evidence to prove either way. So, as always, you can make up your own minds. I've given you several different scenarios and both sides of it. So, with that being said, we are out of time. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this show. And I'm going to throw back over to Old Boy for his shout-outs.
And thank you, brother. I want to give everybody a shout-out on ParaX. We're at over 6,000 subscribers now on the YouTube page. Check out James Hersey's YouTube page. Remember, just subscribe. The bald guy, not the singer. Also, if you want merchandise, James will tell you where to go in a minute. I want to thank all of you guys. I love you guys. We're doing this show every week. We're doing the Tales from the Abyss too. We're gonna have another episode come out soon. We're gonna do 2 more things coming out down the road, and there's a lot of good news coming down the way too. So we'll tell you about that. Keep giving you secrets here and there, a little bit here and there for you guys. Keep you guys off your seats. I want to say good night to everybody. Misfits, sugar ladies, monster hunters, and demon lovers. I love you. Have a great night. Blessed be. Good night.
The YouTube channel is youtube.com/James Hershey Jr. That's where you can find every episode of Staring Into the Abyss, every episode of the TV show Tales from the Abyss that we do, and you can also find all kinds of interesting videos that I do on the side on different paranormal articles in the news, different cases that are being worked, all that kind of stuff. So it's got a ton of great content on that channel. Hundreds of videos for you to watch. 100% free, always will be. Please go there and just enjoy it. Please subscribe to the channel so that you never miss anything. The merchandise store is teespring.com/stores/staring into the abyss. That's teespring.com/stores with an S on the end /staring into the abyss. That's where all the gear is. If you want a staring shirt, a tail shirt, any of that kind of stuff, there's shirts, there's hoodies, there's sweatshirts, there's tank tops, there's towels, posters, all kinds of stuff, coffee mugs, you name it, it's there. If you're into merch and that's something you're interested in, go check out the site, and that's where you can find it all. Thank you guys so much for all the support. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this show. We do all kinds of different stuff on Staring, man. We do everything from hardcore history shows where we really break down somebody's life or an event that took place in history and give you information you never even knew. We do paranormal shows. We do monster shows where we're looking for like creatures. And then we do like cryptozoological shows. We do shows on mysteries like Atlantis and Bermuda Triangle, that kind of stuff. We do shows where we break down like the end times and stuff like that. Man, we do so many different kinds of shows. And I really appreciate all the people that check those shows out. Both on ParaX, thank you guys for listening all around the world. We appreciate you. We love you. And also on the YouTube channel, man. There's some people on the YouTube channel that watch every single video, every single show. They always comment. I appreciate you guys so much. I love you and I thank you. And I read the majority of the comments. I'm not going to say every comment because some of my videos, man, they get like 500,000 or more views and there's just thousands and thousands of comments. And they come in so quick, I can't keep up with it. Honestly, I can't. I try to read as many as I can. So I see what you guys are saying, and I try to give you what you're looking for and what you want. So if there's a subject matter you would like us to cover on Staring Into the Abyss, please go to the YouTube channel and comment on one of the videos and let me know what you would like to hear. We had that with Hellhounds. A lot of people really wanted a Hellhound show from us, and they kept asking for it. And so I did a Hellhound show. We worked one up and researched the hell out of it, pun intended, and gave them exactly what they wanted, a Hellhound show, and they really liked it. So if there's something you guys want to hear that are listening now, please leave it in the comments, and we'll do our best to try to work a show up in the future for you so that you get to hear it. With that being said, thank you. We are completely out of time. I love you. I appreciate you. And until I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do we. Bye-bye.